This video follows on from the one I produced a couple of weeks back entitled Test Your Council's Strategic Alignment, which was really encouraging councils to follow the Local Government Act and structure their delivery programs based on council's functions rather than the themes from the Community Strategic Plan. I now want to build on that idea and look particularly at the relationship between the delivery program, which I'll refer to as the DP from here on, and the operational plan, or OP. The Local Government Act says the DP is to detail the principal activities to be undertaken by the Council to perform its functions, including implementing the strategies in the Community Strategic Plan within the resources available under the resourcing strategy. And it says the Council must establish a new DP after the election covering the 4 year period, in other words for Council's term, although note the delayed elections mean that the next term is only 3 years. And the OP is to detail the activities to be engaged in by the Council during the year as part of the DP covering that year. From what I've seen, a lot of councils struggle to understand the distinction between these two documents. The two approaches I've often seen are councils either combine the DP and OP in the one document, or they largely duplicate the two documents, which not only means the intended audience, councillors, community and staff, are less likely to read them, and so they're not actually driving everything that council does as they should, but it also means they miss the opportunity to make what is, I think, a valuable distinction between the two documents. So I was really pleased to see that the new IPNR guidelines now require councils to prepare the OP as a separate document. I reckon this provides a great opportunity to improve strategic planning within councils if they are clear about the distinction between the two, and I'm sorry to say that I don't believe the advice in the new IPNR handbook has been helpful here. For starters, the model table of contents makes no mention of the DP, nor does the handbook really provide any advice on what a framework looks like to translate the higher level principal activities in the DP into the more detailed activities in the annual OP. The advice on the following page is simply unhelpful. I would agree with the statement that progress should be measured in terms of outputs rather than outcomes, but I would disagree that user satisfaction, which by the way virtually no council measures on an annual basis, or an increase in the number of users are outputs. These are outcomes. Outputs are things like the kilometres of unsealed roads that have been graded, or the number of storytime sessions held at the local library. I was also puzzled when I read that the progress of the OP is monitored via the quarterly budget review and annual report. There's no mention here of the requirement in Essential Element 4.9 of the IPNR guidelines, which was up until recently in the Act itself, before the recent amendments, for the GM to provide 6 monthly progress reports to the Council. So I think there's a real need for some better guidance for councils here, not only to improve their strategic planning, but also the way they manage and report on their performance. So the DP is council's commitment to the community about what it will deliver over its term in office. Where do we want to be in 4 years' time, or 3 years next cycle? This is about outcomes. It can include measures like community satisfaction with a service, but I suggest that wherever possible, council needs to find more meaningful measures than that. For example, in relation to its water supply function, council's commitment to the community should be that water supplies, the water it supplies complies with the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines 100% of the time. It shouldn't be to achieve a certain level of community satisfaction. And its commitment to provide and maintain a sealed road network should be about maintaining that network in a way that minimises the long-term cost, which is all about the integrity of its surfacing, not about community satisfaction. So this might be measured in terms of the proportion of the network with surfacing over the intervention level established in council's asset management plans. And I need to point out here that almost every council community satisfaction survey I've read, the roads are rated as high on importance and low on satisfaction, while libraries are always low importance, high satisfaction. Satisfaction results are an important indicator, yes, but they shouldn't be the primary measure by which council reports on its performance. Then the OP is about the outputs to achieve those outcomes. You might say that this is about how we'll get there, but I think that's unhelpful as it misses the point about performance monitoring that I'll talk about in a minute. It is far better to think of this in terms of how we know we're on track to deliver what we've said we'll deliver in the DP. The best example here is water supply. It's not enough for council to report on whether or not the water it's supplied complies with the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines, which is what it should probably do in the DP. By the time it's reporting it hasn't met this performance target, it's too late. Instead, council needs to be monitoring its performance in terms of whether or not it has developed, implemented and kept under review a drinking water quality management system. This is what provides assurance that the water it will deliver will comply with the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines. When I've looked around the state at how councils are monitoring and reporting on their performance, it's very clear that councils need better advice on these issues. I don't think it's that they don't care. I don't think there's many councillors or GMs out there who wouldn't appreciate rock solid assurance that the water they're supplying is going to comply with drinking water guidelines. So why then are there councils out there whose only performance measure for their water supply function is the percentage completion of their capital works program? Sorry, but who cares? What matters is what's coming out of the tap. I suggest that focusing on the percentage completion of the capital works program is unhelpful for roads too. That means virtually nothing to councillors in the community. If you want to have a meaningful conversation with your councillors and community, you need to make it tangible. The most important issue with sealed roads is resealing. When it rains, the purpose of the sealed surface is to provide a waterproof layer over the gravel pavement so the water runs off and into the table drains. But the bitumen seal oxidizes over time, and if it's not renewed every 20 years or so, it stops being a waterproof layer and lets water into the gravel, weakening the pavement and leading to failures. And as soon as we've got failures, we need to fix that pavement before we can reseal the road. So instead of spending $30,000 a kilometre on resealing, we're up for $200,000 plus to rehabilitate the whole road pavement as well as the surface. So unlike reporting on community satisfaction levels or the percentage completion of the capital works program, I suggest that reporting on the portion of the road network where the surface condition has deteriorated to the extent that it's no longer providing a waterproof layer protecting the pavement is a meaningful and tangible outcome council can identify as a performance target in its DP and commit to deliver over its term in office. But the first step here is clarifying the baseline. So what's the current situation look like and the resources required to achieve this target over its term in office? So let's say council has 600 kilometres of sealed roads, and say council has been out and assessed the condition of its network, and it's identified that 50 kilometres is oxidised to the extent that it's no longer providing a waterproof layer protecting the underlying gravel pavement. And I've got to say here that I'm not convinced that most council assessment techniques, condition assessment techniques, are as clear as this, but that's another matter for another video. For now, let's say that council is sufficiently convinced that they're no longer providing, this 50 Ks is no longer providing a waterproof layer. The first thing I'd say is that this is a real meaningful backlog. It's work that council should have done in the past. It's not just something nice to do to deliver a satisfactory level of service, whatever that is. It's something that council needs to do to manage its infrastructure responsibly and sustainably. So this should link up with your reporting in what used to be Special Schedule 7. The next thing I'd say is that even if council isn't confident about its condition data, it doesn't know whether it's 50 Ks or 100 Ks or 5 Ks that's a problem, the useful life of sealed road surfacing is fairly short. I suggested 20 years before. Some would argue it's more, others less, but 20 years would be a great start for a lot of councils to aim for as a reseal frequency. The council can be fairly confident that over the long term, if it renews around 20 k's a year on average, then it's going to stay on top of its road infrastructure and manage it responsibly and sustainably. So the calculation then is pretty simple. 600 divided by 20 is 30 k's of resealing that it needs to do on average each year. So back to the distinction between the DP and the OP, the outcome, perhaps in terms of the community strategic plan, might include things like having a road network that's safe and transport infrastructure that's managed in a responsible and sustainable way. The CSP might be more vague, but I'd suggest it'd be helpful to have tangible measures in there too. But certainly when it comes to the DP, performance objectives need to be specific because they should be driving council's decisions about the allocation of its limited resources to these activities. Then the OP needs to define how council will monitor its performance to ensure it's on track to achieve those outcomes. And for sealed roads, I'd suggest the best output measure is the length of roads that have been resealed in the particular year. And that's a good tangible measure that can inform the conversation with councillors and the community in the way that I've just ran through with those pictures before of the length of road and the truck and all that sort of stuff. It's far more effective to talk in terms of the length of road than it is percentage completion of the capital works program. So what's this actually look like in the context of the DP and OP documents? Firstly, as I said in the last video, council should be following the Local Government Act and clearly defining its functions. So let's take water supply. Council needs to define how it will measure the outcomes to be delivered to the community, things like water quality. And then it needs to identify the principal activities to perform the water supply function, things like planning, policy, capital works, and it needs to allocate resources to each of these activities over its term in office. Then each year it needs to get into the next level of detail in its OP where it identifies the programs, projects and other actions it needs to undertake within each of these principal activities to, so this might be things like reviewing its drinking water quality management plan, installing a new chlorine monitor and alarm system at the water plant, training extra water treatment plant operators so there's enough to cover periods of leave. It needs to get down to the nitty gritty. Similarly for roads, performance targets might include the proportion of the sealed road network with surfacing past its use by date. Council might have indicators such as the number of service requests or even the number of road crashes on the network. I'd be the first to admit it's not as easy to define meaningful measures, particularly unsealed roads, as their condition changes so quickly, especially in periods of prolonged wet weather. But I'd also say that councils are all facing the same issues, so we should be having a conversation about this as an industry. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Despite the challenges of defining meaningful outcome measures for roads particularly, I do think it's possible to define meaningful ways of monitoring outputs. Council's performance at the OP level, things like the length of road that has been resealed or graded in the last year, the amount of table drains that have been cleared, the number of outstanding high-risk defects identified in your road maintenance management system. All of this will help inform the conversations with councillors and the community about responsible and sustainable asset management. It'll also inform your reporting on things like backlog and required maintenance and the old Special Schedule 7. The last thing to be said here before I wrap up then is about monitoring of progress. As I said before, I suggest it's a significant gap in the IPNR handbook that it doesn't refer to monitoring of progress via the DP progress report. If your council finds the distinction I've made here between outcomes in the DP and outputs in the OP useful, I'd suggest that you need to think about the distinction between the way you report against each of these documents too. Firstly, I'd suggest that the reporting against outcomes in the DP is appropriately done on a retrospective basis. The annual report should be about whether Council has achieved what it set out to do for the year as defined in its OP, which fleshes out the commitments in its DP. But the reporting against the OP is best understood as performance monitoring, and it's essential that councils undertake this on a prospective basis, looking forward as far as possible. This should be about lead, not lag indicators. Here, councils should be asking, will we achieve what we set out to do? And the GM should be providing this information to the councillors to give them assurance that council is on track. I suggest that councils need to be monitoring this stuff more than every 6 months too, but I think that'll happen organically down the track as councils start to see more value in this information. It's a topic for another video, but as I mentioned, the assurance provided by the performance monitoring in the OP, it should be immediately highlighted that these are the same things council should be monitoring via its risk management system, or better, that its risk management framework needs to be integrated with its IP&R framework. And I've got to say that in my view, the draft guidelines for the risk management and internal audit framework OLG is issued, is currently out for comment, fall a long way short in this regard. I just think they're kept separate, they're not integrated. That needs to change. So hopefully all that's been helpful. If it was, or if you disagree with anything I've said or think it wasn't as clear as it could have been, I'd appreciate you taking the time to comment on my post on LinkedIn. We need to be talking about this stuff. But anyway, thanks for watching, and best of luck with it all.